The worn brass key felt impossibly heavy in Silas Ward's calloused, trembling fingers as he stood before the weathered saloon that represented the last fragile thread of hope for his family's survival. The harsh October wind of 1878 carried the bitter scent of approaching winter across the high desert landscape of Nevada Territory. And with it came the cruel reminder that he possessed exactly $4.37 to his name. Barely enough for a single meal, let alone the sustenance needed to keep his 7-year-old daughter alive through the coming months. The journey from Carson City to this remote mining town of Silver Ridge had taken 3 days of walking their few remaining possessions strapped to their backs, like the belongings of refugees fleeing some unnamed catastrophe. Which, in many ways, they were. The bank foreclosure on their small cabin had been the final blow in a series of misfortunes that had steadily eroded every foundation of security Silas had managed to build since his wife's death 2 years earlier. Ruby clutched her mongrel dog's frayed rope leash with one small, dirt-stained hand, while the other shaded her remarkably bright blue eyes against the afternoon sun. Despite their desperate circumstances, the hollow ache of hunger that had become a constant companion, and the uncertainty that shadowed every moment of their existence. She maintained that irrepressible curiosity and wonder that had defined her since she could walk. Her keen intelligence often unnerved adults who expected children to be seen rather than heard. But Silas treasured her questions and observations as proof that hardship hadn't crushed her spirit. "Papa," she said with a startling perception that sometimes made him forget how young she was. "This place doesn't look like nobody's been taking care of it. But it also doesn't look like people have been living here neither. See how the porch steps got fixed recent-like, but there's still boards over all the windows." Silas forced himself to study the building before them with greater attention, pushing past the fog of exhaustion and desperation that had clouded his judgment for weeks. The inheritance letter from the territorial courthouse had arrived like an answer to prayer after the bank took their home, though he remained baffled by its contents. A complete stranger named Darius Gentry had apparently bequeathed him this saloon in Silver Ridge, along with what the legal papers described as associated properties and assets of significant value. The Silver Dollar Saloon squatted in the dusty main street of Silver Ridge like a monument to better times, long past. Its weathered, clapboard siding had faded from what might once have been cheerful yellow to the color of old bones, and the painted sign above the entrance had weathered until only ghostly fragments of letters remained visible against the cracked wood. Broken windows stared out from behind hastily nailed boards, giving the building the appearance of a man with his eyes covered, and the front porch sagged under the weight of years and neglect. According to the lawyer who had tracked Silas down in a Carson City boarding house, a thin, nervous man with ink-stained fingers who'd seemed eager to complete the transaction and be gone. The Silver Dollar hadn't served a customer in over 3 years, not since Darius Gentry died suddenly of what the doctor had called a heart attack. The establishment had been closed and secured immediately after the funeral, with instructions that it should remain untouched until Gentry's chosen heir arrived to claim his inheritance. But Ruby's sharp young eyes had caught inconsistencies that Silas's weary desperation had initially missed. Fresh horse droppings near the hitching post told a story of recent visitors, though someone had taken considerable care to clean up most evidence of their presence. The wooden steps showed recent repair work, subtle but unmistakable to someone who had spent years doing carpentry and construction work to supplement his meager income from odd jobs. Most telling of all was the general condition of the building itself. While it certainly appeared abandoned and neglected, it lacked the deep decay that should have accumulated over 3 years of complete abandonment in the harsh Nevada climate. The roof showed no signs of major leaks, and the foundation remained solid and level. And even the paint, while faded, hadn't reached the point of complete deterioration that would be expected. "Papa, look up at that window there on the 2nd floor," Ruby said, pointing with a fearless directness that both worried and amazed her father. One of them boards is sitting crooked, and I can see light behind it, like maybe someone's got a lamp burning up there. Silas squinted upward, his hand instinctively moving to rest on the worn walnut grip of the old Colt Navy revolver that rode in a holster on his right hip. The weapon was one of the few possessions he had refused to sell during their slide into poverty, partly because it had belonged to his father, but mostly because a man traveling alone with a young daughter in the territories needed protection against the various predators, both human and animal, that lurked in the wilderness. Ruby was absolutely correct in her observation. Someone had carefully loosened one of the wooden boards, covering an upstairs window, creating a narrow gap that would be completely invisible from street level, but would provide an excellent vantage point for watching anyone who approached the building. The implication sent ice through Silas's veins as he realized they were almost certainly being observed at this very moment. Ruby's dog, a scrappy mixture of breeds that had adopted their small family during the journey from Carson City, began growling with a low, rumbling intensity that indicated serious alarm. The animal wasn't directing his attention toward the saloon, however. Instead, his hackles were rising as he stared fixedly at something behind them, his entire body tense with primitive warning. Silas turned slowly, every survival instinct he possessed screaming danger, and spotted 3 riders silhouetted against the sky on the rocky ridge that overlooked Silver Ridge from the north. The distance was too great to make out faces or specific details, but their posture and positioning made it clear that they were deliberately watching the scene below with focused interest. The riders remained motionless for several long minutes, studying Silas and Ruby with the patient attention of predators evaluating potential prey. When Silas blinked dust from his eyes and looked back toward the ridge moments later, the mysterious watchers had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. But the unsettling certainty remained that their arrival in Silver Ridge had been noted by people who preferred to remain hidden, and that those people had reasons for their secrecy that probably didn't bode well for a desperate widower and his young daughter. "Papa, why would someone give us a broken old saloon that nobody wants?" Ruby asked with the devastating directness that children possess the ability to cut straight through adult pretenses and complications to reach the uncomfortable truth at the heart of any situation. "And how come it feels like somebody's been watching us ever since we got to this town?" The questions had haunted Silas every day since receiving the inheritance papers a week earlier. He had never heard the name Darius Gentry before reading it in the legal documents, had no memory of ever visiting Silver Ridge or anywhere else in this part of Nevada territory, and possessed no connection whatsoever to the mining industry that apparently drove the local economy. Most disturbing of all, the lawyer who had handled the paperwork transfer had displayed a suspicious eagerness to finalize everything, quickly pressing Silas to sign documents without taking time to read them thoroughly or ask detailed questions about their contents. But desperate men in desperate circumstances couldn't afford to be overly suspicious of unexpected good fortune, no matter how unlikely or mysterious its origins might appear. When faced with the choice between potential danger and certain starvation, most rational people would choose to face the unknown risks rather than accept guaranteed destruction. The brass key that would supposedly unlock their salvation felt warm from the heat of Silas's palm as he approached the heavy wooden door of the Silver Dollar Saloon. The entrance was secured with a massive iron padlock that showed significant rust and weathering, exactly what would be expected after years of exposure to the harsh elements of the high desert climate. But when Silas inserted the key and attempted to turn it, he noticed something that sent a chill racing down his spine despite the afternoon heat. The key turned far too easily, with none of the resistance that should have been present in a lock that hadn't been opened for 3 years. Someone had been regularly maintaining this mechanism, keeping it oiled and functional, despite the saloon's apparent abandonment. The massive wooden door swung open with barely a whisper of sound, its hinges as silent and smooth as if they had been oiled yesterday. The interior that was revealed defied every reasonable expectation of long-term abandonment. Instead of the thick coating of dust-accumulated debris and spider webs that should have filled every corner after 3 years without human habitation, the Silver Dollar appeared to have been cleaned and maintained with meticulous care. Sturdy wooden tables sat arranged in neat rows throughout the main room, their surfaces gleaming with recent polish. The long mahogany bar that dominated the far wall showed no signs of neglect. Its brass fittings bright and its wood grain rich with the deep luster that came from regular attention. Most unsettling of all, lying prominently in the center of the bar's polished surface, was a sealed envelope with Silas Ward written across its face in careful flowing handwriting that suggested education and refinement. Someone had not only known they were coming to Silver Ridge, but had known exactly when they would arrive and had prepared accordingly. Ruby stayed close beside her father as they entered the mysteriously pristine saloon, her dog sniffing cautiously at air that should have been stale and musty after years of being sealed, but instead carried the faint, pleasant scent of lemon oil and beeswax. Clear evidence of recent cleaning. The late afternoon sunlight filtering through narrow gaps in the boarded windows created shifting patterns of light and shadow that seemed to move with a life of their own, giving the empty room an almost supernatural atmosphere. "Papa, this place is too clean for nobody to have been living here," Ruby observed with the matter-of-fact tone she used when stating obvious truths that adults seemed determined to ignore. "And somebody left you a letter right where you'd be sure to see it." "That means they knew we were coming, doesn't it?" Silas's hands visibly trembled as he approached the bar and picked up the envelope, noting that the red wax seal was still slightly warm to the touch, as if it had been placed there within the last hour. The paper was expensive, the kind used for important legal documents or formal correspondence, and the handwriting displayed the careful precision of someone accustomed to handling significant business matters. He broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter, reading its contents twice before their full meaning penetrated the fog of hunger, exhaustion, and confusion that had clouded his thinking for days. "Mr. Silas Ward, I have been maintaining this establishment in secret for the past 3 years, hoping and praying that someday Darius Gentry's chosen heir would arrive to claim what rightfully belongs to your family. Your father, Samuel Ward, saved Darius's life during the catastrophic mine collapse at the Comstock Lode 15 years ago. And Darius never forgot that debt of honor. He spent the remainder of his life ensuring that Samuel Ward's family would never want for anything should the need arise. However, I must warn you with the utmost urgency that dangerous men have been making persistent inquiries about this saloon and what Darius left behind for your family. These men know about the contents of the basement vault, and they will not hesitate to use violence, including violence against your daughter, to claim what they believe should be theirs by right of strength rather than law. Trust no one in this town except Tom Bradley and myself. We are the only people in Silver Ridge who know the truth about your inheritance and who can be relied upon to protect your interests. We will find you when it is safe to make contact. But until then, please exercise extreme caution in all your dealings. Your faithful servant and guardian of Darius's legacy, Marcus Webb, former business partner and lifelong friend of Darius Gentry. The letter's revelations hit Silas like a series of physical blows, forcing him to grip the edge of the bar for support as the implications became clear. His father had died in the infamous Comstock mining disaster. When Silas was just 12 years old, one of 37 miners killed when poorly constructed tunnels collapsed during a winter storm that had dumped 3 feet of snow on the mountains in a single night. The tragedy had left Silas's mother a widow with 2 young children and no source of income beyond the occasional charity of neighbors. But there had been one mystery that had puzzled the family for years afterward. Unlike the other widows who received nothing beyond empty expressions of sympathy from the mining company, Silas's mother had begun receiving a modest monthly payment from an anonymous benefactor. The money had never been enough to make them comfortable, but it had meant the difference between bare survival and actual starvation during the hardest months. Now, 15 years later, that mystery was finally solved. Darius Gentry had been sending those payments faithfully, honoring a debt to the man who had apparently saved his life in the depths of a collapsing mine. But if the letter was accurate, Gentry's gratitude had extended far beyond monthly payments to a widow. He had been building something much larger, much more significant as a lasting monument to Samuel Ward's heroism. "Papa, there's people talking down there real quiet like." Ruby whispered urgently, tugging at his coat sleeve and pointing toward a heavy wooden door that obviously led to the saloon's basement levels. "I can hear two men's voices, and they sound worried about something." Ruby's hearing had always been remarkably sharp, able to detect sounds that escaped adult attention entirely. If she claimed to hear conversation coming from below, Silas had learned to trust her judgment completely. He drew his revolver with careful deliberation, checking the cylinder to ensure that all 6 chambers held fresh cartridges, before motioning for Ruby to stay close behind him as they approached the basement door. The voices became clearer as they descended the steep wooden stairs, their boots creating small, creaking sounds, despite their attempts at stealth. What Silas heard rising from the depths below made his blood run cold with understanding and fear. "Marcus, those riders are back on the ridge again. 3 of them this time, and Tom says they've got the look of professional gun hands, not just local troublemakers looking for easy money." A second voice replied, older and more weathered by years of hard experience. "We knew this day would eventually come, didn't we? Ward's finally arrived, which means we can turn this whole complicated mess over to him and be finished with our obligations to Darius. But those vultures circling outside aren't going to make the transition easy or peaceful." "How much do you think Ward knows about what he's inherited?" the first voice asked with obvious concern. "If he's expecting nothing more than a rundown saloon and maybe a few dollars in the till, he's going to be in for quite a shock when he learns the truth." "That's exactly why Darius left those detailed instructions," the older voice responded. "Ward needs to understand not just what he's inheriting, but why he's inheriting it, and what kind of dangers come with sudden wealth in a territory where might often makes right." Marcus Webb. Silas called out softly, his gun ready, but not directly threatening. The conversation below ceased, immediately followed by the sound of rapid, cautious footsteps moving across what sounded like a stone floor. "Dear Lord, is that really you, son?" came the reply from below, filled with obvious relief and something that might have been joy. "Come down here where we can see you properly, but keep that gun handy. We may need it before this day is over." When Silas and Ruby completed their descent into the basement, they found themselves in a space far larger and more elaborate than either had expected. The basement extended well beyond the footprint of the building, above carved directly into the solid rock that formed the foundation of Silver Ridge. Wooden support beams and stone archways created a series of interconnected chambers, all lit by kerosene lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the walls. 2 middle-aged men stood near the far wall, positioned protectively in front of several large wooden crates that had been carefully stacked and secured with heavy iron straps. The older of the 2 men stepped forward with obvious relief and genuine emotion written across his deeply lined, weathered features. "Sweet Jesus, you look exactly like Samuel Ward did when he was your age." The man said, his voice thick with memories and suppressed emotion. "I'm Marcus Webb, and this grizzled old prospector here is Tom Bradley. We've been taking turns watching over this place for 3 solid years, waiting and praying for the day when you would finally come to claim what Darius left behind for your family." Marcus gestured toward the wooden crates with a mixture of pride and deep concern. "Your father didn't just save Darius Gentry's life in that mine collapse, son. He saved all 6 of us who were trapped in that tunnel when the supports gave way without warning. But more than that, and this is the part that most people never learned, Samuel Ward fought off the men who had caused the cave-in, deliberately men who were trying to murder Darius and steal his mining claims." This revelation struck Silas like a lightning bolt, forcing him to steady himself against the cool stone wall, while his mind struggled to process information that fundamentally changed everything he thought he knew about his family's history. Someone deliberately caused that mine collapse. He managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're telling me that my father was murdered?" Tom Bradley nodded grimly, his weathered face reflecting years of carrying difficult truths. A group of claim jumpers led by a man named Jeremiah Pike had been watching Darius for months, studying his routine and planning their move. They wanted his mining rights, and they figured a convenient accident would solve their problem permanently while making them rich beyond their dreams. Marcus continued the explanation with obvious pain at having to relive those terrible memories. Pike and his men weakened the main support beams in the deepest tunnel, timing everything for when they knew Darius would be down there, conducting his weekly safety inspection. When the collapse happened exactly as planned, they expected to find nothing but bodies when the dust settled. But they hadn't counted on Samuel Ward. Tom added with fierce pride. "Your father was working a different section that day, but when he heard the rumbling and crashing, he didn't run for safety like most men would have done. Instead, he grabbed tools and started digging toward the sounds of trapped men, even though the whole area was still unstable and more collapses were likely." Marcus picked up the story, his voice growing stronger as he spoke of heroism rather than tragedy. "Samuel didn't just dig us out, son. When Pike's men showed up to finish their murderous work, thinking everyone was already dead, your father held them off with a shotgun while we escaped through a secondary tunnel. He died buying us the time we needed to survive, and he died knowing that he had prevented a terrible crime." The magnitude of this revelation left Silas temporarily speechless. His father hadn't been simply another unlucky miner killed in an industrial accident. He had been a genuine hero who had sacrificed his own life to save others and prevent multiple murders motivated by pure greed. Darius never got over the guilt of surviving when Samuel died. Marcus continued quietly. "He spent the rest of his life trying to build something worthy of your father's sacrifice, something that would ensure Samuel Ward's family would never suffer from poverty or want." Tom glanced nervously toward the small basement windows near the ceiling where the late afternoon light was beginning to fade. "Marcus, we need to move this conversation along. I can hear more activity upstairs, and it doesn't sound like friendly visitors making social calls." As if summoned by his words, the sound of heavy boots moving across the saloon floor above became clearly audible to everyone in the basement. Multiple people were now inside the building, and their movements suggested they were conducting a systematic search rather than casual exploration. Marcus quickly motioned everyone toward the back of the basement where the wooden crates were stacked against the natural stone wall. Tom grabbed a kerosene lantern and led them behind the largest crate, whispering urgently as they took cover. "Those men have been watching this place for weeks, waiting for you to show up, Silas. Word has somehow gotten out about what Darius left here, and now every treasure hunter, claimed jumper, and outlaw in 3 territories knows about it. They've been circling like vultures, waiting for their chance to strike." As they huddled in the flickering lantern light, Marcus began explaining the true scope and nature of what Silas had unknowingly inherited, his voice low, but filled with obvious pride in his dead friend's accomplishments. "Darius discovered far more than just silver during his mining operations, son. He found evidence of massive ore deposits throughout this entire valley, deposits that the territorial government and the big mining companies didn't know existed. He quietly bought up mining rights and land claims for thousands of acres, always paying fair prices, but never revealing the true value of what he was acquiring," Tom added with growing excitement. "But Darius never trusted banks or government officials with his wealth, not after what Pike and his associates had tried to do. He kept everything here in this basement that he had excavated and reinforced to serve as his private vault." Ruby's eyes grew wide with wonder and disbelief as she looked at the wooden crates surrounding them. Even in the dim lantern light, she could see that several had been partially opened, revealing neat stacks of gold coins that gleamed like captured sunlight, small leather pouches that clinked promisingly when moved, and official-looking documents wrapped in oiled cloth to protect them from moisture and decay. "Yo, Papa, are we really and truly rich now?" she whispered with the innocent amazement that could find magic and wonder in even the most serious adult situations. Before Silas could find adequate words to answer such a profound question, the basement door above them burst open with a violent crash of splintering wood, and unfamiliar voices called down with unmistakable menace and barely controlled greed. "We know you're down there, Webb. Come up immediately with your hands where we can see them and bring Ward and his brat with you. We're not leaving this place empty-handed, and we're tired of playing games and being patient about it." Tom cursed with the practiced fluency of a man who had spent decades in mining camps and frontier towns, confirming what Silas already suspected with growing dread. These weren't friendly visitors making social calls or legitimate inquiries about property ownership and legal rights. Marcus turned to Silas with grim determination etched in every line of his weathered face, his voice urgent but controlled. "There's an old mining tunnel behind these crates, son, carved out during the original excavation work more than 20 years ago. It follows a natural fissure in the rock and leads to a grove of cottonwood trees about 50 yards from here, well beyond the main buildings where those men will be watching." He pressed a heavy leather pouch into Silas's trembling hands while continuing his rapid explanation. "Take Ruby and go now, while Tom and I keep these vultures busy and try to buy you some time to escape. This pouch contains enough gold coins to get you and your daughter somewhere safe, somewhere far from here where you can plan your next moves without immediate danger." The sound of multiple pairs of boots descending the wooden stairs with deliberate, threatening slowness made the decision desperately urgent. Silas could see the narrow tunnel opening that Marcus had indicated barely wide enough for a grown man to squeeze through comfortably. Ruby, small and naturally agile, would have no difficulty navigating the passage. But the thought of crawling through unknown underground spaces with his daughter while armed men hunted them made his stomach churn with paralyzing fear. "Papa, I can hear even more horses outside," Ruby whispered with the precision that came from her unnaturally sharp hearing pressing her ear against the cool stone of the basement wall. "Lots of them coming from different directions, like they're trying to surround the whole building." If Ruby's assessment was accurate, and Silas had never known her to be wrong about such things, they were facing far more than just the group of men who had entered the saloon. This was beginning to look like a carefully coordinated assault by multiple parties, all converging on Silver Ridge with the same deadly objective. "Son, you need to understand something crucial before you make your decision," Marcus said with quiet intensity, his weathered hands gripping Silas's shoulders. "Those men upstairs won't be satisfied with simply taking whatever gold they can carry and disappearing into the Badlands. They know that you're the only person who can legally claim Darius's treasure and property. As long as you're alive, their possession of anything they steal will never be secure." The implication was chillingly clear. These weren't ordinary thieves planning a simple robbery. They were preparing to commit murder to eliminate any witnesses or legal complications that might arise from their crimes. Tom Bradley checked his own weapon, a well-maintained Winchester rifle that showed signs of frequent use, before adding his own grim assessment of their situation. "And they won't hesitate to kill Ruby either, Silas. Children grow up to ask inconvenient questions and seek justice for murdered parents. These men don't leave loose ends that might come back to haunt them later." As the intruders reached the bottom of the stairs and their lantern light began sweeping methodically across the basement walls like the searching eyes of predators, Silas realized he had perhaps seconds to decide whether to attempt fighting their way out against overwhelming odds or trust his daughter's safety to a dark tunnel that might lead to freedom, or might collapse on them in the darkness. The decision was made for him when Ruby's dog suddenly bolted toward the tunnel opening with a sharp bark of alarm, disappearing into the narrow passage, as if his animal instincts had detected immediate danger that human senses couldn't yet perceive. Ruby immediately followed her beloved pet without hesitation, her small form vanishing into the tunnel opening with the absolute trust in her father that had sustained them through their darkest and most desperate days. "Ruby, wait for me," Silas called softly, but she was already gone, swallowed by the underground darkness that offered their only hope of escape. He had no choice but to follow, abandoning the relative familiarity of the basement for the unknown dangers and claustrophobic terrors of the tunnel system. The passage was rougher and more treacherous than anything he had expected, carved directly through solid rock and loose earth, with hastily installed wooden support beams that creaked ominously under the enormous weight of the ground above. The air was stale and difficult to breathe, thick with the mineral scent of deep earth and the musty, unpleasant odor of spaces that rarely saw sunlight or fresh air circulation. Behind them, angry shouts erupted from the basement as the intruders discovered the concealed tunnel entrance that Marcus and Tom had tried to keep hidden. "There's a passage back here behind these crates. Bring more lanterns immediately and get some men into that tunnel before they get too far ahead of us." Silas crawled faster through the increasingly narrow space, his knees scraping painfully against rough stone projections, while his shoulders brushed constantly against the tunnel walls that seemed to be closing in around him. The claustrophobic sensation was almost overwhelming, made worse by the knowledge that armed men were pursuing them through the same confined space, where retreat or maneuver would be impossible. Somewhere ahead in the absolute darkness, he could hear Ruby talking to her dog in the soothing, encouraging tones she used when the animal was frightened or uncertain. Her calm voice provided a beacon of hope that helped him maintain his sanity while navigating the nightmare of underground pursuit. "It's okay, boy," she was saying. "Papa's right behind us, and this tunnel's got to come out somewhere safe. Just keep going toward the fresh air I can smell up ahead." The tunnel began curving upward at an increasingly steep angle, following what must have been a natural fissure or fault line in the rock formation that supported Silver Ridge. The grade became so severe that Silas found himself essentially climbing rather than crawling, using his hands and knees to maintain traction against the smooth stone surface. After what felt like an eternity of claustrophobic struggle through the underground maze, Silas saw the most beautiful sight imaginable. Actual daylight filtering down from above, growing stronger with each forward movement. Ruby's voice called back to him with excitement and relief that made his heart soar with hope. "Papa, we made it to the outside, and you definitely need to see what I found up here. It's something important, I think." When Silas finally hauled himself out of the tunnel opening, gasping desperately for fresh air and blinking in the late afternoon sunlight, Ruby was waiting for him with her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes bright with discovery and accomplishment. In her small, grimy hand, she held an object that made Silas's heart skip several beats. Another brass key, this one newer and more ornate than the one that had opened the saloon door. They had emerged into a small grove of cottonwood trees, approximately 50 yards behind Silver Ridge's main street, exactly as Marcus Webb had promised. The location provided excellent concealment from casual observation while offering multiple escape routes through the surrounding wilderness. Ruby's dog was already exploring the area with obvious relief and growing confidence, his tail wagging as he investigated fascinating scents carried on the afternoon breeze. But their moment of relief and celebration was devastatingly short-lived. As Silas helped Ruby brush dirt and debris from her dress while trying to assess their next moves, he spotted movement in the distance that made his blood freeze with terror and despair. 4 additional riders were approaching from the east at a fast trot, kicking up significant dust clouds in their wake, and moving with the purposeful determination of men who knew exactly where they were going. These weren't the same men who had entered the saloon, which meant the group hunting them was substantially larger and far better organized than Silas had realized in his worst nightmares. The approaching riders carried rifles across their saddles and moved with the disciplined precision of military veterans or professional gunfighters who had worked together before. This wasn't a spontaneous robbery attempt by opportunistic criminals looking for easy money. This was a carefully coordinated military-style operation by people who had spent considerable time planning every aspect of their assault. As the new group drew closer, Silas could make out their leader with horrifying clarity. A heavily scarred man, with cold, calculating eyes and the unmistakable bearing of someone thoroughly accustomed to violence, intimidation, and the kind of casual brutality that made other men step aside rather than risk confrontation. The scarred man raised his hand in a practice signal, and his companions immediately spread out in a textbook, flanking maneuver designed to prevent escape while maximizing their tactical advantages. "Mr. Silas Ward." The scarred man called out with mock politeness that made the threat implicit in his words, even more chilling his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. "My name is Pike, Jeremiah Pike Jr. to be precise, and I believe we need to have an urgent conversation about your recent inheritance and the unfortunate complications it has created." The name hit Silas like a physical blow as he realized the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about robbery or claim jumping. This was about revenge, about finishing business that had been left unresolved 15 years earlier when Samuel Ward had died protecting Darius Gentry and his fellow miners. Silas pushed Ruby behind the largest available cottonwood tree, his mind racing through increasingly desperate options while calculating the hopeless odds of a gunfight against professional killers who held every possible advantage. These men had been positioned and waiting for him to emerge from whatever hiding place he might find. They knew about the tunnel system, about the inheritance, about everything connected to Darius Gentry's legacy and the events that had shaped it. "What kind of conversation did you have in mind, Pike?" Silas called back his hand, moving to rest on the grip of his revolver, while knowing that drawing the weapon would likely mean death for both himself and Ruby. Pike dismounted with deliberate slowness, his every movement designed to demonstrate complete confidence and control over the situation. The kind where you hand over what never rightfully belonged to your family in the first place, and nobody gets hurt unnecessarily. Especially that pretty little daughter of yours hiding behind that tree. The threat was unmistakable and chillingly specific, crystallizing Silas's understanding of their desperate situation. These men weren't planning to be satisfied with simply taking whatever gold they could find and disappearing into the vast wilderness. They needed to eliminate anyone who could legally claim the property, testify about their crimes, or seek justice through territorial law enforcement. "My father saved your father's life," Silas replied with growing anger, finding courage he didn't know he possessed. According to the men down in that basement, Samuel Ward died a hero, preventing a murder that Jeremiah Pike planned and tried to carry out. Pike's scarred face twisted with rage and old bitterness as he spat his response. "My father died in a territorial prison because of lies told by Darius Gentry and his associates. Everything that Gentry built, every dollar he accumulated, every acre of land he claimed, all of it should have belonged to the Pike family. We're just here to collect what's ours by right of attempted murder." Silas shot back, surprised by his own boldness in the face of overwhelming danger. But before the deadly confrontation could escalate beyond angry words, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats from multiple directions filled the air, with the promise of either salvation or even greater disaster. More riders were converging on their position from the direction of Silver Ridge's main street, and to Silas's amazement and profound relief, he recognized several faces among the newcomers that gave him reason for hope. Sheriff Morgan led the largest group, his badge glinting prominently in the late afternoon sunlight, and his hand resting confidently on his holstered weapon. The sheriff was a man in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of steady demeanor that came from years of maintaining law and order in a territory where violence was often the first resort rather than the last. Behind him rode Judge Parker, the territorial magistrate whose reputation for fairness and integrity was known throughout central Nevada, and whose legal decisions were respected even by men who disagreed with their outcomes. Following the official representatives of territorial law came several of Silver Ridge's most prominent and respected citizens, including the town banker, the general store owner, the assayer who certified mining claims, and the minister who served the small but growing community of families that had put down roots in the area. Most importantly of all, Marcus Webb rode at the front of the civilian group, and he was leading 2 additional horses that were loaded down with wooden crates that could only have come from the saloon's basement vault. Somehow, Marcus and Tom Bradley had managed to rescue at least part of Darius Gentry's treasure before the confrontation escalated beyond their control. As the various groups faced each other in the grove of cottonwood trees, with the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the ground and highlighting the tension in every man's posture, Pike's confident demeanor began showing visible cracks of uncertainty and growing concern. He had been prepared to deal with one desperate man and a frightened child. Not half of Silver Ridge's civic leadership backed by legitimate legal authority and armed with proper warrants. Sheriff Morgan. Pike called out with forced casualness that fooled absolutely no one present. "We're just having a friendly discussion with Mr. Ward here about some long-standing property disputes that need to be resolved through proper legal channels." Sheriff Morgan dismounted with the deliberate care of a man who had faced dangerous situations many times before and had learned the value of measured responses over hasty actions. His hand never strayed far from his weapon, but he projected calm authority rather than aggressive threat. "Pike, I've received multiple reports from reliable witnesses about armed men breaking into private property and making violent threats against lawful citizens who were attempting to claim their legal inheritance. That doesn't sound particularly friendly to my way of thinking, and it certainly doesn't sound like a civil property dispute." Marcus Webb stepped forward with the confidence of a man presenting irrefutable evidence, addressing the sheriff in a voice that carried clearly across the grove so that everyone present could hear his words and understand their significance. "Sheriff, those men broke into the Silver Dollar Saloon using explosives to destroy the front door, threatened to kill Tom Bradley and myself when we tried to prevent them from stealing Mr. Ward's legal inheritance, and have been making specific threats against his 7-year-old daughter. I have multiple witnesses from town who will testify under oath that Ward's ownership papers are completely legitimate, properly executed, and legally filed with the territorial government." Judge Parker accepted a thick sheaf of documents from Marcus and examined them with the careful, meticulous attention to detail that had made him one of the territory's most respected legal minds. His expression grew increasingly serious and authoritative as he read through page after page of official paperwork, legal descriptions, and witness statements. These documents appear to be entirely in order and properly executed according to territorial law. Judge Parker announced in his commanding courtroom voice that brooked no argument or contradiction. "Mr. Ward, if these papers are authentic, and they certainly appear to meet all legal standards for such documentation, you own not just the Silver Dollar Saloon, but a substantial amount of valuable property throughout this entire valley and the surrounding territory." Pike's face darkened with frustrated rage as he realized that his carefully planned operation was rapidly disintegrating before his eyes. Months of preparation, weeks of surveillance, and considerable investment in men and equipment were all being wasted because of legal complications he had hoped to avoid through swift, decisive action. "Judge Parker, sir, with all due respect," Pike said through gritted teeth, "legal papers can be forged by anyone with sufficient skill and motivation. The only way to settle this dispute fairly and definitively is to examine what's actually hidden in that basement they're so determined to protect from legitimate scrutiny." "Actually, Mr. Pike," Judge Parker replied with the calm precision of absolute legal authority, "these documents were properly filed with the territorial government 3 years ago, immediately following Darius Gentry's death and the reading of his will. Mr. Ward's ownership has been a matter of official public record for quite some time. Anyone could have verified this information through proper legal channels rather than resorting to criminal activity." The words struck Pike and his followers like a series of physical blows, leaving them momentarily speechless as they realized that their months of planning and preparation had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the legal situation. They had assumed they were stealing hidden treasure from a helpless victim who had no legal recourse, only to discover they were attempting to rob someone whose ownership was protected by territorial law and backed by local authority. But desperation, greed, and the momentum of their criminal enterprise made dangerous men even more unpredictable and potentially violent. Silas could see in Pike's eyes that he was still considering violence as his only remaining option for salvaging something from the disaster his operation had become. That was the moment when Marcus Webb chose to reveal the full staggering extent of what Silas had inherited, speaking clearly and deliberately so that everyone present could hear and understand the magnitude of the legacy that Samuel Ward's heroism had created. But gentlemen, I believe it's time for complete honesty about what we're discussing here. Marcus announced with obvious pride in his dead friend's accomplishments. Darius Gentry didn't just hide gold coins and silver nuggets in that basement vault. He left behind the legal deed to the largest producing silver mine in Nevada territory, plus official documentation proving ownership of 12,000 acres of prime land that includes most of the grazing and farming territory around Silver Ridge. The revelation sent a ripple of amazement through the assembled crowd. But Marcus wasn't finished with his stunning disclosure. He also owned the water rights that control irrigation throughout this entire valley, timber rights to the largest forest preserve in the region, and a 25% ownership stake in the Nevada Central Railroad line that's scheduled to be completed through here within the next 18 months. When that railroad is finished, it will connect Silver Ridge directly to San Francisco and the major markets back east. The magnitude of the inheritance left everyone present, including Silas, completely speechless for long moments. This wasn't merely about enough money to provide food and shelter for his family through the coming winter. This was about wealth and property holdings that would make him one of the most powerful and influential landowners in the entire territory. Judge Parker studied the additional documents that Marcus had provided, his eyebrows rising higher with each page, as he absorbed the full scope of Darius Gentry's business empire and its transfer to Samuel Ward's family. "Mr. Ward," the judge said with genuine amazement, "if these documents are accurate, and they appear to be supported by proper legal documentation and witness statements, you have inherited not just significant wealth, but substantial economic and political influence throughout central Nevada. This inheritance would make you one of the territory's major property owners." Pike's desperation reached its absolute breaking point as he realized the true scope of what was slipping through his fingers forever. The wealth and power that he had convinced himself belonged rightfully to his family was legally, definitively, and permanently beyond his reach. "Maybe the paperwork says the gold belongs to Ward." Pike snarled with barely controlled fury and the dangerous desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. But accidents have a way of happening to folks who suddenly come into great wealth, especially when they have young daughters who might wander off somewhere and get permanently lost in the wilderness. The threat was barely disguised and absolutely chilling in its implications, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind about Pike's willingness to commit murder to achieve his goals. Every man present understood exactly what he was suggesting, and the atmosphere in the grove became electric with tension and the promise of imminent violence. Sheriff Morgan stepped forward with his deputies flanking him in a display of official authority, their rifles now openly displayed and ready for immediate use. The sheriff's voice carried the weight of territorial law and the promise of swift justice for anyone who chose to defy it. "Pike, you and your men have exactly two choices available to you right now. Mount up and ride out of this territory immediately and permanently, or find yourselves under arrest for trespassing, breaking and entering, theft, destruction of property, and making terroristic threats against a lawful property owner and his minor child." But Pike wasn't ready to surrender his life's ambition without a fight that would determine the outcome once and for all. His calculating eyes assessed the tactical situation. 6 experienced gunfighters under his command, against perhaps a dozen townspeople, many of whom were merchants and businessmen rather than professional fighters. His hand moved deliberately closer to his gun as he weighed his chances of shooting his way out of the confrontation. 6 of us against all of you people, Pike said with a dangerous quiet that preceded violence. Maybe we can't win a straight gunfight, but I absolutely guarantee we can make this whole situation extremely expensive for everyone involved. Especially for that little girl hiding behind the tree over there. That was the precise moment when Silas Ward made a decision that surprised everyone present, including himself, and demonstrated a wisdom and courage that would be remembered and discussed in Silver Ridge for years to come. Reaching into the heavy leather pouch that Marcus had given him during their escape from the basement, he pulled out a substantial handful of genuine gold coins and held them up where Pike and his men could clearly see their gleaming surfaces catching the late afternoon sunlight. Pike, you and your men came to Silver Ridge looking for gold, and you're about to leave here empty-handed after months of planning and considerable risk, Silas said with quiet authority and confidence that seemed to emerge from nowhere, surprising even himself with his calm demeanor in the face of mortal danger. But I'm a reasonable man who understands that desperate people sometimes make poor choices when they're facing financial ruin. Take these coins as fair compensation for your time and trouble, and we'll consider this entire matter completely settled with no hard feelings on either side. Pike stared at the offered gold with obvious hunger and desperate longing, but also deep suspicion born of years surviving through violence, deception, and betrayal, in a territory where trust was often rewarded with a bullet in the back. What's the catch, Ward? Pike demanded, with the wariness of a man who had learned that nothing valuable ever came without a price. Nobody gives away genuine gold without expecting something substantial in return, especially not to men who've been threatening his family. No catch whatsoever, Silas replied with calm sincerity that was impossible to fake or misinterpret. But if you or any member of your gang ever comes near my daughter again, or if you attempt to interfere with my property or business interests in any way, I will use my new legal ownership of half this territory to ensure that you are permanently banned from every town, every business establishment, and every piece of land within 100 miles of here. Judge Parker can make that prohibition official and legally binding with a single signature on the proper documents. Judge Parker nodded with grave authority and obvious approval of Silas's wisdom in offering a peaceful resolution to what could have become a bloodbath. Property owners in this territory have considerable legal power over who is permitted on their land, Mr. Pike. You and your associates would be facing automatic criminal trespass charges anywhere you attempted to conduct business with mandatory jail time as the penalty for violation. Pike found himself trapped between his desperate need for some kind of profit from this failed venture and the very real threat of permanent banishment from the region where he and his men had operated for years. The gold coins represented more money than they were likely to acquire through months of conventional criminal activity. While defying Ward's offer would mean facing not just immediate death in a gunfight, but legal persecution that would follow them anywhere they tried to establish new operations. After a long moment of internal struggle that played out visibly across his scarred features, Pike snatched the gold coins from Silas's outstretched hand with obvious reluctance and bitter defeat. The weight of genuine gold in his palm was undeniable, and it represented the only positive outcome he was likely to achieve from this disaster. This situation might not be completely finished, Ward. Pike muttered darkly as he signaled his men to mount up and prepare for departure. But there was resignation rather than genuine threat in his voice. The presence of legal authority armed townspeople and the prospect of permanent banishment had made continued resistance both pointless and potentially fatal. As Pike and his frustrated, defeated followers rode away toward the Badlands beyond Silver Ridge, kicking up dust clouds in their wake and carrying with them the bitter taste of failure, Ruby emerged from behind the protective cottonwood tree with her eyes wide with amazement and dawning understanding of what had just transpired. "Papa, are we really and truly rich now?" she asked with the innocent wonder that could find magic and possibility in even the most serious adult situations. And does this mean we don't have to worry about having enough food anymore? The simple, heartfelt questions from his daughter crystallized everything that truly mattered about their transformed circumstances. All the land ownership, mining rights, and business interests in the world meant nothing compared to the security and happiness of the little girl who had trusted him completely through their darkest days. 3 hours later, as the sun began to set behind the western mountains and paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Silas found himself sitting in the thoroughly cleaned and lovingly restored Silver Dollar Saloon, staring in continuing bewilderment at legal documents spread across the polished mahogany bar, while Ruby played contentedly with her dog in the corner. Judge Parker had spent the entire afternoon patiently explaining the full extent and implications of the inheritance, and the numbers involved were so staggering that Silas found himself literally unable to speak for minutes at a time. The silver mine alone produces enough high-grade ore every month to support 50 families in comfortable circumstances. Marcus explained with obvious pride in his dead friend's business acumen, pointing to detailed production records that showed consistent outputs worth thousands of dollars monthly. The Gentry mine employs over 100 men year-round, and the quality of the ore they're extracting is among the finest ever discovered anywhere in Nevada territory, Tom Bradley added with growing enthusiasm. Then there are the land holdings that Darius accumulated over the years. 12,000 acres of the most valuable territory in central Nevada, including the best grazing land for cattle and sheep, the most reliable water sources for irrigation and drinking, and strategic access to transportation routes that will become incredibly valuable when the railroad is completed. Marcus continued the explanation with obvious satisfaction at finally being able to reveal the full scope of his friend's legacy. Darius also purchased a 25% ownership stake in the Nevada Central Railroad line that's currently being constructed through this valley. When that's completed sometime next year, it will connect Silver Ridge directly to San Francisco and all the major markets back east. That railroad investment alone will generate more revenue annually than most people see in several lifetimes. Sheriff Morgan, who had remained to ensure the peaceful transition of the property, added his own perspective on the inheritance's significance. Mr. Ward, what you've inherited here isn't just wealth. It's substantial economic and political influence throughout this entire region. The Gentry holdings represent one of the largest and most successful business enterprises in Nevada territory. Silas shook his head in complete disbelief, his mind still struggling to process information that seemed to belong in someone else's life rather than his own. Marcus, when I woke up this morning in that old barn outside of town, I was genuinely worried about finding enough food to keep Ruby alive for another day. Now you're telling me that she's potentially one of the wealthiest children in the entire Western Territories. The transformation felt so complete and so impossible that part of his mind kept expecting to wake up from an elaborate dream, only to find himself back in their desperate poverty with nothing changed except the cruel addition of false hope. Judge Parker gathered the inheritance papers with obvious satisfaction at seeing justice done and legal matters properly resolved. Your father saved far more than just Darius Gentry's life in that mine collapse, Mr. Ward. According to the detailed written account that Darius left behind, along with sworn statements from the other survivors, Samuel Ward died, protecting not just his fellow miners, but the foundation of everything we're discussing here today. Marcus Webb's expression grew solemn and reverent as he prepared to reveal the final, most important piece of the puzzle that had shaped both families' destinies. Silas, I need to tell you the complete truth about what happened in that mine 15 years ago, because Darius wanted you to understand not just what you're inheriting, but why you're inheriting it, and what kind of man your father really was. He handed Silas a leather portfolio containing several pages of careful handwriting preserved and protected through the years, like a sacred document. The official territorial report classified that mine disaster as an industrial accident caused by structural failures and severe weather conditions. But Darius left behind written testimony that proves what actually happened. And he made me promise to show you this evidence when you finally came to claim your inheritance. Silas opened the portfolio with trembling hands and began reading Darius Gentry's first-hand account of that terrible day, written in the careful script of a man who understood the historical importance of his words. The events of November 15, 1863, were not an accident as officially reported, but a deliberate act of murder planned and executed by Jeremiah Pike and his associates. Pike had been pressuring me for months to sell my mining claims at far below their true value, and when I refused his increasingly aggressive offers, he began making threats against my life and property. On the morning of the disaster, I was conducting my weekly safety inspection of the deepest tunnels when I noticed that several main support beams had been deliberately weakened with saw cuts that were partially concealed but clearly visible to anyone who knew what to look for. I immediately realized that Pike intended to murder me and make it appear accidental. But before I could escape to warn others, the charges he had placed brought down the entire section. Samuel Ward was working a different area that day. But when he heard the explosion and collapse, he didn't flee to safety as most men would have done. Instead, he gathered tools and began digging toward the sounds of trapped men, even though the entire area remained unstable and additional collapses were likely at any moment. When Pike and his men arrived to verify that their plan had succeeded and that no witnesses had survived, they found Samuel Ward and two other miners successfully extracting the trapped men through a partially cleared passage. Pike immediately ordered his men to open fire, intending to kill everyone present and claim they had died in the original collapse. Samuel Ward could have escaped during the confusion, but instead he grabbed a shotgun from one of the dead guards and held off Pike's men while we completed the rescue of the trapped miners. He died buying us the time we needed to escape through a secondary tunnel, and his last words were instructions to make sure his family was taken care of if something happened to him. I have carried the guilt of Samuel Ward's sacrifice for 15 years, and I have spent every day since then building something worthy of his heroism. Everything I have accumulated, every dollar, every acre of land, every business interest, represents my attempt to honor the debt I owe to the man who saved my life and the lives of 5 other miners. If something happens to me before I can personally ensure Samuel Ward's family receives what they deserve, I hereby bequeath my entire estate to his surviving children, with the specific hope that his daughter and granddaughter will never know poverty or want as long as they live. The revelation completely recast everything Silas thought he knew about his family's history and his father's character. Samuel Ward hadn't been simply another unlucky miner killed in an industrial accident. He had been a genuine hero who had sacrificed his own life to save others and prevent a horrific crime motivated by pure greed and ambition. Marcus waited patiently, while Silas absorbed the full impact of his father's heroism before continuing with the rest of the story. Darius spent the remaining years of his life not just accumulating wealth, but trying to build something that would serve as a permanent monument to Samuel Ward's character and sacrifice. Every business decision he made, every investment he pursued, every acre of land he acquired, was motivated by his determination to create a legacy worthy of your father's heroism. Tom Bradley added with obvious emotion, and he made very specific provisions for Ruby's future because he wanted to ensure that Samuel Ward's granddaughter received every opportunity and advantage that her intelligence and curiosity deserved. Marcus smiled warmly as he handed Silas another document from Darius's collection. There's a separate trust fund that Darius established specifically for Ruby's education, containing enough money to send her to the finest schools in San Francisco or even back east, with full support through college if she chooses to pursue higher learning. He wanted to make certain that she would have every opportunity to develop her mind and talents to their fullest potential. Ruby looked up from playing with her dog, her attention caught by the mention of her name and the obvious emotion in the adults' voices. Does this mean I can really learn to read all the books I want, Papa, and maybe learn to write stories like Mama used to tell me? The innocent question, so perfectly capturing her deepest dreams and aspirations, nearly brought Silas to tears as he realized that everything his bright, curious daughter had ever wanted was now not just possible, but guaranteed. For months, he had watched her go without books, without proper schooling, without any of the educational opportunities that her quick mind and natural curiosity deserved. "Yes, sweetheart," he managed to say through the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him completely. "You can read all the books you want, and you can learn anything that interests you. You can become whatever you want to be, because now we have the means to make any dream possible." Sheriff Morgan prepared to leave as the evening shadows lengthened across Silver Ridge. But he paused at the saloon door to offer final reassurance about their security and legal protection. "Mr. Ward, I'll make sure that word spreads throughout the territory about the official protection of your property rights and your family's safety. Between the legal documentation, the territorial authority you now possess, and the respect that Darius Gentry's name still carries throughout Nevada, I don't believe Pike or anyone like him will dare to bother your family again." As the various townspeople began heading home to their own families, Marcus Webb made one final revelation that left Silas nearly speechless with gratitude and wonder at the depth of Darius Gentry's generosity and foresight. "Silas, there's one more thing that Darius wanted you to understand about why he made these arrangements, something that goes beyond simple gratitude or obligation to your father's memory. In the months before his death, Darius came to realize that Samuel Ward represented everything he most admired about human character. Courage in the face of danger, loyalty to friends and principles, selflessness in helping others, and an absolute commitment to protecting innocent people regardless of personal cost." Marcus gestured around the beautifully restored saloon, its polished wood and brass fittings gleaming in the lamplight, like a shrine to better times and noble aspirations. Darius spent his final years not just accumulating material wealth, but trying to build something that would serve as a lasting tribute to the kind of man your father was, and as a foundation for the kind of future he would have wanted for his family. This inheritance isn't just money and property. It's a monument to Samuel Ward's character and a promise that his sacrifice will continue to benefit others for generations to come. Standing in his inherited saloon, watching his daughter play peacefully for the first time in months, while her faithful dog dozed contentedly at her feet, Silas felt overwhelmed by a complex mixture of emotions that seemed too large and powerful for any human heart to contain. Grief for the father, whose heroism he was only now beginning to understand. Gratitude for Darius Gentry's extraordinary generosity, and the profound wisdom of his final gift. Hope for a future that had seemed impossible just hours earlier, but now stretched before them, filled with unlimited possibilities. Most of all, he felt the weight of responsibility that came with such an inheritance. Not just the practical responsibility of managing vast wealth and extensive business interests, but the moral responsibility of living up to his father's example, and using this gift in ways that would honor Samuel Ward's memory and continue his legacy of helping others. Their lives had been completely transformed in a single day, elevated from desperate poverty to unimaginable wealth through the echoing consequences of a heroic act performed 15 years earlier. But the transformation went far deeper than material circumstances. They had discovered not just financial security, but a connection to something larger than themselves. A legacy of courage, sacrifice, and the profound bonds that connect one generation to the next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and enormous responsibilities that Silas could barely begin to imagine. He would need to learn how to manage complex mining operations that employed hundreds of workers. He would need to oversee vast land holdings that affected the lives of entire communities. He would need to make decisions about railroad investments, water rights, and timber management that could influence the economic development of the entire region. But tonight, for the first time since his wife's death, 2 years earlier, Silas could sleep without the gnawing worry that had consumed every waking moment. The fear of watching his daughter slowly starve, while being powerless to help her. Tonight, he could rest in the knowledge that Ruby's future was secure, that her intelligence and curiosity would be nurtured and developed, that she would have every opportunity to become whatever her talents and dreams might lead her to be. As he prepared a proper bed for Ruby in one of the saloon's upstairs rooms, their first night in what was now truly their home rather than temporary shelter, she asked one more question with the wisdom and perception that sometimes surprised him with its depth. Papa, do you think Grandpa Samuel would be proud of what we're going to do with all this? And do you think he would want us to help other people the way Mr. Gentry helped us? Silas smiled through tears he didn't try to hide, thinking of the father whose heroism had created this miraculous inheritance, and of the stranger who had honored that heroism in the most extraordinary and generous way imaginable. I think he would be very proud, Ruby. And I think he would absolutely want us to use this gift to help other people, just like he helped Darius Gentry and those other miners. That's what good people do. They use whatever advantages they have to make life better for others, especially those who need help the most. Outside the windows of the Silver Dollar Saloon, the Nevada wind carried the promise of new beginnings across the vast territory that now belonged to them, whispering through the cottonwood trees and across the desert landscape, like a blessing on their transformed lives. Inside, a father and daughter slept peacefully for the first time, in longer than either could remember, their future finally secure, thanks to the enduring power of honor sacrifice and the profound connections that link past, present, and future in an unbroken chain of human goodness. The ornate brass key that Ruby had discovered in the tunnel would indeed prove to unlock additional secrets. A safety deposit box in the Territorial Bank, containing even more documents detailing Darius Gentry's extensive business partnerships and investment strategies, along with detailed instructions for managing the various enterprises that now belonged to the Ward family. But those discoveries would come in the days ahead, along with the gradual understanding of just how vast and complex their inheritance truly was. For now, it was enough that justice had prevailed over greed, that good had triumphed over evil, and that the legacy of a hero lived on in the security and happiness of his family. The silver mines would continue to produce their wealth, the railroad would bring prosperity to the entire region, and the vast land holdings would provide homes and livelihoods for countless families in the years to come. But most importantly, the memory of Samuel Ward's courage and sacrifice would inspire future generations to choose heroism over self-interest, to protect the innocent rather than exploit the vulnerable, and to understand that the greatest treasure any person can leave behind is not gold or land, but the example of a life lived with honor, integrity, and love for others.